Meanwhile, the Senate is
Back to the virus.
Meanwhile, the Senate is paralyzed, just what Americans want to hear right about now. They're deadlocked on a nearly $2 trillion emergency bailout bill. This is the second time in as many days the Senate has failed to move forward with an aid package. A big sticking point here, the $500 billion the bill would set aside for federal loans for states, cities, businesses. The bitter partisan tension was clearly evident today on the Senate floor.
We Democrats are trying to get things done, not making partisan speech after partisan speech. Leader McConnell continues to set arbitrary vote deadlines when the matter of real importance is the status of the bipartisan negotiations.
For days now, we've been engaged in intense bipartisan talks to build emergency relief legislation on an historic scale. But yesterday, when the time came to vote on these urgent measures, our Democratic colleagues chose to block it.
We should also point out there are members of the Senate missing. They're dealing with members directly affected by the outbreak. Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota today announced her husband has tested positive for the virus and is in fact being hospitalized. Earlier this evening, the senator spoke to Rachel Maddow.
I would love to be at my husband's side right now, but instead I'm with you, which is fine, on this show. But it is so hard because you want to talk to the doctor and be there. You want to see what the oxygen levels are. You want to bring flowers, and you can't do any of that. And that's going to happen to everyone. The American people should not settle for what they've had to date, which is not enough tests, not enough equipment. And that's why I'm here tonight.
Yesterday, Republican of Kentucky, Senator Rand Paul, revealed he had tested positive for the virus. Today, as he was being criticized for being tested despite having no symptoms, he insisted more Americans should be able to be tested. Senator Paul, who we hasten to add is a doctor, had used the Senate gym and had been in close contact with senators while waiting for his results. One of those senators is Mitt Romney. Here's how his close friend, the president, reacted to the news yesterday that Romney is in quarantine.
Romney's in isolation?
Yes.
Gee, that's too bad. Go ahead.
The text arc has him there?
No,
Sir?
no, that's enough.
So there was that. Today in the briefing room, Dr. Deborah Bricks was asked about Rand Paul's decision not to self-isolate while waiting for test results.
Each person has to be responsible in the way that they decrease their interaction with others, the 6 feet. You're all very social distance, so thank you. But also assuming that everyone that you're interacting with could be positive.
There was also a notable absence at this evening's briefing. That would be Dr. Anthony Fauci. He was MIA. More on that ahead. And one more thing from the briefing, the president, who has been trying hard, along with backup from some on Fox News, to brand this illness as the Chinese virus, reacted today to the prejudice this has caused toward Asians here in the U.S.
It seems that there could be a little bit of nasty language toward the Asian Americans in our country, and I don't like that at all. They are making statements to great American citizens that happen to be of Asian heritage.
Here for our leadoff discussion on a Monday night, Nancy Cook, White House political reporter for Politico, Melanie Zanona, congressional reporter also with Politico, and Dr. Lippy Roy, assistant clinical professor for the Department of Population Health at the NYU School of Medicine. She is among our medical contributors. Good evening. Thank you all for coming on. Nancy, I'd like to begin with you. Is it possible we have reached the social distancing attention span of the president? Is it possible that he truly is thinking of loosening up advice, regulations, way earlier than most physicians would recommend? Can you take us inside your reporting for Politico, inside the West Wing and these deliberations?
Sure. And so I started to hear over the weekend that there was this brewing fight between economic officials and top public health officials who were participating in the coronavirus task force. And basically what was happening was that economic officials had been hearing from business leaders, and the president himself was getting very worried about the state of the economy. And there was this thinking that, there was this pondering of whether or not they should keep urging people to do social distancing at the end of the 15-day mark, or whether or not they should give people a different guidance. And really what has happened is that the economic officials have so far won the battle, and the president tonight said that he thought that they would reopen the economy soon. Meanwhile, the top public health officials in the administration are uniformly horrified by this idea. They think it's terrible. The virus is spreading throughout 50 states. The infection rate in New York, or at least the ones we know about, is rapidly increasing. And they just feel like it's way too soon to reopen schools, businesses, restaurants, that we really need to get this under control. And the other point that the public health officials make is that there's still really a scarcity of testing in the U.S. And so it's very difficult to even know who is positive and who should be isolated. And until that testing problem is solved, the public health officials within the administration feel like this is a very irresponsible choice.
And doctor, you're obviously here to talk about medicine, public health, and not politics. So I'll ask you, this very optimistic talk today from the president about perhaps a date certain to reopen business as usual in America. He raised the possibility that public health experts would clear region by region of our country, telling people it's safe to come out. I'm assuming you would find this counterproductive.
Hi, Brian. Good to be with you. I feel like I have to take a deep breath every single day. We all need to, because we need to brace ourselves for a very long, dark, and tough, challenging road ahead. My fellow medical professionals are using terms like we're calling up politicians, and we're going on media, social media, wherever, talking about the Defense Production Act, military support in hot zones, and supply chain nationalization coordination. This is not what we're trained to do. We are trained to do a specific role, which is direct patient care. That's what we're trained for. It's what we're good at. The fact that my fellow medical colleagues are talking about all these other things is really a reflection of a failure of leadership. And this is going to have dire consequences, catastrophic consequences on millions of patients, and ultimately as well on healthcare workers, because this unprecedented burden that the healthcare workers are going to face is going to have a psychological toll on healthcare workforce. Remember, pre-coronavirus, I think we have to redefine our timelines, pre and post COVID-19. Pre-COVID-19, burnout rates amongst physicians and clinicians was extremely high. Almost 50% of doctors experience burnout, which is emotional and physical exhaustion and depersonalization, which has adverse effects in terms of patient quality of care. So an increased result in increased medical errors. All of this is related, and we're making a strong cry here for help and support, which we need desperately.
Melanie, I am guessing on behalf of the bartenders and servers and people in retail who are home watching, out of work, temporarily unemployed, that the last thing they want to hear about is bickering in the U.S. Senate. But please, it is your beat. I know that. Please tell us where it stands right now.
Well, Brian, I've been checking in with my sources constantly on Capitol Hill, and what I can tell you, at least as of right now, both sides feel like they are within striking distance of a deal. The last we heard is about an hour ago. Chuck Schumer was in a meeting with Stephen Mnuchin, and Mnuchin left with one of Schumer's aides, which is a good sign. But look, I have to give the usual caveats that things could always fall apart. A deal is not final until it's final. And there is an overwhelming sense of urgency among lawmakers right now, that they need to get something done. Democrats especially are getting hammered by Republicans right now, being accused of holding things up, even though they're trying to push to make the bill better, in their words. And on top of all of that, lawmakers are also concerned about being in the Capitol for their own health and safety. A lot of these members are older, they're more vulnerable. There's more and more cases every day of either AIDS or other lawmakers contracting coronavirus.
As I have said before, I'll say again, the system is broke. That's the reason why we put the broken cross up on 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, representing the system being broke. Whenever you have something this dire, and whenever these people can't come together in deciding what they're going to do and how they're going to do it, in the result of an extreme, dire crisis emergency, that tells me that not only the system is broke towards having 2.3 million incarcerated prisoners in jail, over $23 trillion in debt, but we can't make heads from tails towards what our officials is actually involved in doing. This confirms that the system, the United States government, is in fact broke.
It's causing attendance issues, and so everybody wants to get this done for the American people, and also so they can get out of the Capitol as well.
Nancy, as I pointed out at the top of the broadcast, or tried to very little of what the president had to say in the briefing room today matched up with the reality we are covering here tonight. Why his insistence, according to your reporting, his insistence on having a speaking role at this briefing every day when, especially on a night like tonight, Fauci was MIA?
Yeah, it's been interesting to me, the evolution of how the president has crept into this briefing. And I was at the White House this weekend for the two briefings, and I was there sitting through the briefings for about 3 hours in total on Saturday and Sunday. And today the briefing lasted almost 2 hours. I feel like what's happening is that the president really has no outlet at this point. He's not traveling. He's not doing campaign rallies. He's not going to Mar-a-Lago or Bedminster. And he really needs an outlet to speak to people. And I think that these briefings have taken the place of that. I also feel like he really wants to paint this optimistic picture, and he feels like he is the best face of the response. And so he keeps going out there and sort of trying to say, oh, things are great, we're going to open soon. But he keeps undercutting and contradicting his health officials and sending so many mixed messages to Americans about potential treatments for this, the time frame of when they should stop social distancing. And so there's a lot of angst in the White House about whether or not these briefings every day are a good idea. And there's a lot of angst about how time consuming they are. But the president, I think, has really come to like them. And so I think that we will see him being a feature of the White House moving forward.
I also saw it surmised that because his live audience rallies have been suspended, this gives him oxygen, the oxygen of a kind of live appearance or performance. Doc, I want to play for you something I saw tonight in real time on Fox News, Tucker Carlson's broadcast. He had the lieutenant governor of Texas on tonight, who noted he was 70 years old, and that puts him in one of the risk categories. I'll let him make the point. We'll listen to this, but the summation of what he was trying to say in his own words was the only thing worse than loss of life in this country would be loss of the American way. We'll play it, talk about it on the other side.
No one reached out to me and said, as a senior citizen, are you willing to take a chance on your survival in exchange for keeping the America that all America loves for your children and grandchildren? And if that's the exchange, I'm all in.
So, Doctor, I recognize this goes to philosophy, it goes to politics, it's very personal in his world, in his life. It's also a viewpoint you're starting to see And here, what do you make of it again as a public health professional?
So look, I've said this before, I'll say it again. As doctors, as nurses, as frontline healthcare workers, we have one agenda, one sole agenda, and that's to preserve the health and safety of our patients. And frankly, it's going to be in the order of millions of people. So we need to just act. The doctors and nurses, we know what we need, and we're being handcuffed. We're just not getting it. Patients are going to die. We know that, Brian. People are already dying. We already know the numbers in New York City. I at least feel reassured that Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo are acting, and they're taking the advice closely from their medical and public health officials. So we really need to act, and we're just not getting the support that we need. That's all I can really say, Brian.
Melanie, a quick question to you about politics and the U.S. Senate. When you talk to senators, you realize that on the Ted Cruz unpopularity ranking scale, Rand Paul is right up there already. How is his coronavirus diagnosis going over in that chamber?
Well, there's bipartisan outrage because after he took the test, he didn't self-isolate, which is what health experts have said are the guidelines. Instead, he continued to carry on his daily life. He worked out in the Senate gym, which he wasn't supposed to be doing. He also was going to the Senate lunches. And now, as a result of that, he potentially exposed other senators, and at least 2 other Republicans have had to sit on the sidelines and weren't able to vote on Sunday or today because of it. So now the GOP's already thin majority is even thinner. You have members who are growing increasingly worried. And I think this whole episode with Rand Paul is just really stepping up the anxiety and the anger in the Capitol hallways right now.
On that note, our thanks on a Monday night to Nancy Cook, to Melanie Zanona, and to Dr. Lippy Roy. We appreciate the 3 of you helping start us off. And coming up for us, we'll ask a Pulitzer Prize-winning science journalist about the growing wave of information and disinformation now overwhelming a frightened population. And later, a deeper look into the growing debate over saving an ailing U.S. economy or saving more lives, as the 11th hour is just getting started on a Monday night.
Cancer. Do not stop taking a prescribed medication without first consulting with your doctor. Discontinuing a prescribed medication without your doctor's advice can result in injury or death.
Call 1-800-742-1025.
Wells Fargo Home Mortgage presents Lulu and Lobo.
I tend to wonder which is more horrible, the disease or the reaction to the disease. Even the people back in the Bible day knew whenever somebody had something that was basically something that people couldn't cure in a lengthy time, and the death rate was very, very high pertaining to leprosy. They knew to isolate them people off in areas away from the general public. And that was over 2,000 years ago. And of course, I can see where at that time, pertaining to their advanced knowledge with medication and etc., that's the best that they could do at the time that they had to do it in. But the point being is that they knew that it was something that the general public didn't want to have a part of. And because they didn't want to have a part of it, they isolated those people that had leprosy and those people that had those type of diseases. I just can't fathom the reason why that the Republicans and the Democrats can't come together on an emergency session like this and without a shadow of a doubt make a clear, defiant definitive move in engaging in some sort of a crisis on this level. To me, that's almost as bad or worse than the disease itself.
Nightly News with
What's being worked on today?
At a time of crisis, turn to the most trusted TV news anchor in America.
Without this pill, we die.
He's doing the best he can for the country.
This is the perfect time to graduate.
There's like a lot of shooting happening. It's about how we take care of one another and how we invest in the future.
These are thoughtful voters who, more than anything, want these candidates to cut to the chase.
There is some encouraging news out of Italy, and every night we're going to give it a try and try to find some good news. The BBC is reporting a 3D printing company in Italy has designed and printed 100 respirator valves after a hospital there ran out of them. They cost about $1 each. The prototype took about 3 hours to design. According to an article in Forbes, the coronavirus crisis may have an upside, and we quote, "While the grave and tragic human toll of lost lives cannot be measured, there is a silver lining if the history of pandemics is a guide. This contagion, like all others, will spark a wave of innovation proportional to how it alters the shape of society." We are so pleased to have our friend back with us tonight, Walter Isaacson, distinguished fellow with the Aspen Institute, former editor of Time magazine, veteran journalist and author, biographer of, in no particular order, Franklin, Einstein, Kissinger, Jobs, and Da Vinci. In his spare time, he's a professor of history at the Jewel of New Orleans, Tulane University. Walter, thank you very much for coming on. I guess I want to know from you, what do you think we are at the beginning of right now, and how is your betting on America as you know it to get through what you think is coming?
Well, I think America will get through it. It's the most innovative country in history. And as you said, sometimes tragedies like this have to spark innovation. I think we'll have new ways of doing supply chains. We'll have printing on demand. The whole notion of a global supply chain will probably break down a bit, and we'll have more local manufacturing. But most importantly, I think it'll be a century of biotechnology. I think people watching this who are young today will say, all right, the past half century, the last part of the 20th century, was an infotechnology revolution. This is going to be a biology revolution, a biotech revolution, and it's going to come with people understanding viruses, understanding how to do genetic editing, understanding new technologies like CRISPR, because those are going to be so much in demand.
Let me run a theory by you. In all the history you've studied and know about, has there ever been a single individual who will have, even though it's socioeconomic, who will have as big a control over our supply chain as Jeff Bezos and Amazon and the role they're about to play in getting stuff to American homes that can afford it?
Well, yes. I mean, that's one of the innovations that came after the SARS crisis was a whole lot of online shopping. And I think, you're going to see that now. But there is a hunger that people have to actually be together. We thought that online shopping would destroy the retail industry, just as we thought Walmart might. But people do want to get out and get together. So I think once we create vaccines and treatments for this, whether it's in 6 months or 18 months, I don't think we're going to just be shopping online.
So we can assume that the engine of American industry, science, technology, we're all motivated to work toward a cure, toward therapeutics for this. We can assume that they're going to be running hell-bent for leather toward that goal.
Oh, everybody is. I was just in communication with Jennifer Doudna, one of the co-inventors of the gene editing technology CRISPR, and they're holding meetings about How do you find new detection technologies? How do you find new ways to fight viruses? You know, bacteria have been fighting viruses for 3 billion years. And one of the things that we've done in biotech recently is take from bacteria some of the ways that they fight against viruses. So I think you're going to see this type of innovation, just like after World War II, where the government, academia, and private enterprise all work together to create things like the computer, the internet, and the microchip.
We try to keep religion out of this kind of thing, but your lips to God's ears, Walter Isaacson. Thank you. We're probably going to ask to talk to you along the way. We greatly appreciate being able to interview you tonight. And we're back live. Here's how I'm able to change clothes so fast. That was an interview with Walter Isaacson on tape from a few nights ago, because in the last commercial break, we lost everything. As you know, we're all in individual satellite remote studios. We lost all of our incoming Skype interviews. We have cobbled together our next couple of guests. This ought to be interesting. We'll take another break here. When we come back, that segment we promised about information and disinformation out there right now.
And you got to look at the truth. The facts is that we have just as much factual information that we have disfactual information. Is it just a pure out and out lie? Or is it fake and phony news? It could reach that level of saying that people are saying stuff that they don't know what they're talking about in regards to this corona virus that's now wreaking havoc upon various cultures all over the planet. But to think that our president is now trying to crawfish and say, oh, we're going to have more of a economical disaster than we are a physical disaster based upon human casualties, to me, it speaks volumes about where our president truly has his values at. His values isn't on human consumption, human life, but it's on the almighty dollar bill. It's on the good old American dollar bill. And whenever it reaches that point that we have leadership that is that corrupt, that a human life or human lives is more valuable. Let me back up. Whenever it reaches the point that human lives is not as important as the good old American dollar bill, that's whenever we need to stop and retreat and back up and reevaluate our morals and our values towards what we think of our citizens, not only here in America, but throughout the planet. Because the first and the foremost thing comes is human life. Of all life. It is so sad. So sad.
This is a little bit like testing new tires on a moving car. Tomorrow, clinical trials will begin in New York for a malaria medication dispensed in combination with an antibiotic to treat coronavirus. As we mentioned, Dr. Anthony Fauci notably absent from today's coronavirus briefing at the White House. But on Friday, he was asked about the efficacy of repurposing this old malaria drug for this illness.
Dr. Fauci, as was explained yesterday, there has been some promise with hydroxychloroquine, this potential therapy for people who are infected with coronavirus. Is there any evidence to suggest that, as with malaria, it might be used as a prophylaxis against COVID-19?
No, the answer is no. And the evidence that you're talking about, John, is anecdotal evidence.
So there's that. And with us tonight by phone, which we sure tried to get her to be able to see her on Skype, Laurie Garrett. As a science writer, she is the recipient of the Pulitzer Prize, the Polk and Peabody Awards. She's the author of The Coming Plague and Ebola, Story of an Outbreak, a rom-com, obviously. She's also a contributor to Foreign Policy and a former senior fellow for global health over at the Council on Foreign Relations. Lori, thank you very much for coming on and putting up with a blanket electronic failure into and out of our 30 Rock control room tonight. Talk some more, please, about this medicine and any danger as you see it from a public health perspective of getting hopes up high in any of these areas.
Well, as you know, Brian, there is a woman fighting for her life in a hospital in Arizona tonight. Her husband died because they took chloroquine after hearing the president say it was the right way to treat their COVID-19 illness. And it turned out they took chloroquine phosphate, which is used to clean out fish tanks. It killed one of them, and the other is fighting for her life. This is the danger of saying things and announcing treatments, announcing medicines when they haven't been proven, when there are people in the public who won't fully understand the nuances. They're not doctors. They don't know how to dose themselves properly. They'll go out and they'll buy fish tank cleaner, thinking that that's the anti-malarial drug chloroquine. I think that this is just heading down a path towards devastating outcomes as we have the president announcing medical breakthroughs, supposedly, and we have certain commentators beating the drum in favor of these medicines, but they've not been proven. They've not been subjected to clinical trials. And these are not drugs without side effects. I mean, one of the drugs in the pack is AZT. That was the very first drug invented for treating HIV illness, and that drug had a whole range of side effects.
Can you believe that in the greatest country on earth, we had tested by the end of February, this came out today, 352 individuals, so roughly the number of passengers who can fit on the largest passenger jet in the world. The greatest country on earth had tested a sum total of 352 souls in the month of February. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells you that we weren't taking this seriously. We weren't acting when acting could have made a difference. And we weren't doing the things we needed to be doing to bring this epidemic under control. Look, Brian, the latest data from the World Health Organization is really ought to be startling and terrifying to everybody, because we're almost at 400,000 cases in the world. These are officially confirmed cases. And as Dr. Tedros told us today in his briefing, it took 67 days for the world to get the first 100,000 cases. It took 11 days to get the second 100,000 cases. It took 4 days to get the third 100,000 cases. And we may hit the 400,000 in just 2 days. This thing is taking off. It's skyrocketing. It's in nearly every country in the world. And it is out of control. So for us to be so far down the path, grasping at anti-malarial drugs, grasping at AZT, the ancient, 1980s version of HIV treatment, and telling the public that, hey, the stock market is the problem, we're going to take out all this social distancing nonsense within 15 days and you can all go back to work. This is just mind-boggling. Absolutely mind-boggling.
Lori, I absolutely had to talk to you because of something
It's insanity. It's insanity.
I was channel hopping this weekend and happened upon an interview with you where you made a point about all the needs in all of our communities right now and how for decades in this country there was a kind of an unofficial army of civic organizations that sprung up and took care of our needs. Largely in the generation that gave way to us, they were returning World War II veterans, certainly men and women of that generation. We look around, and as you put it, at any civic local meeting you go to, the average age is up there, and that all of that musculature in a community is not there anymore.
You know, Brian, a lot of people are forming various kinds of volunteer entities, efforts to change the course of this epidemic online. But there's a limit to what can be done online. There comes a point when you need actual people power, feet moving on soil, and coming together to carry out actions that were the kind of thing that in the old days you counted on from the Red Cross, from the Community Chest, United Way, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. You know, in 1947, the city of New York that you and I are both sitting in was threatened with smallpox. There was an individual who'd gone all over as a tourist throughout Manhattan and had smallpox, infected some other people. Panic ensued. The commissioner of health said, I'm going to somehow find enough vaccine to revaccinate the entire population of New York City. And who mobilized all those people and got them dutifully in lines to be revaccinated for smallpox? It was the Boy Scouts, and it was the Red Cross. Well, today, I doubt anybody would let the Boy Scouts carry out any kind of helpful activity related to this epidemic.
It's a hell of a point. Laurie Garrett, please come on with us again, especially when we can see you. But thank you for putting up with us tonight and sharing your wisdom with us. We appreciate it. Coming up as we move on, New Mexico joining the list of states telling people to stay home. We'll talk live with their governor about her decision.
Sad. It's sad that we're living in the 21st century and we're still dealing and approaching matters this serious in the way that the White House is dealing with this. Especially whenever it comes to the leader of the free world. I can't believe that people are taking stuff to clean algae out of the bottom of fish containers, aquariums, and thinking that they're going to be able to take it and beat the disease that will actually cause death because of this experiment. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. This demon that has been unleashed, just like the Bible talks about in Revelations, for in the last days Satan will rise up in great wrath. In great wrath. Because he knoweth his time is short. This is proof in the pudding. This is the evidence of that supernatural being that has created this virus that is now jumping from one human being to another. And some of us is going to make it and some of us is not. That's the bottom line. Some of us is going to make it and some of us is not. And I just pray to God, if those who have never had a born-again relationship with Christ, that they will stop what they're doing right now and reiterate on the Bible and pray to the Father. Father, forgive me, lead me, O Lord, not into temptation, but deliver me from this evil. In Jesus' name. And I just pray for the many, many souls that are going to be exterminated of those who do not give their heart and life over to Christ.
According to her daughter,
The great state of New Mexico. The great state of New Mexico has joined a growing list of states to take more serious precautions, instructing the people there to stay at home to help reduce the ongoing spread of this coronavirus. With us for more is Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, Democrat of New Mexico. Governor, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I realize you have other concerns to worry about. Tell us first off where your state's numbers are at last count. And I note the stay home directive is dated till April 10th. I presume you reserve the right to extend it if you're still in the teeth of this thing, correct?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, because we're following CDC data and looking at the World Health Organization data and our own data points, we're beginning that 2-week area where you really have to slow the spread of this virus. So the likelihood that we have to extend remains high. We have 83 confirmed cases, 18 new cases reported today. That's our single highest day. And we're a state that's been doing better, I think, in terms of per capita representation of testing. So we're about 6,250 tests, but it's not enough to stay proactive and provide the kind of instructions to your population and businesses that can really impact bending the curve. And so we'd like to be doing more.
If two people walked into an ER tonight in Albuquerque, one of them was me and another person was a poor person from Albuquerque, we were both presenting with symptoms, would we both be able to get tested? Would one of us? Would neither of us?
All testing in New Mexico is free. All costs associated with COVID-19 treatment is covered. And in fact, we've taken another step, which is anyone, say, for example, our childcare workers, right, our frontline workers, we're making sure that many of them are uninsured, and we're making sure that they are part of our high-risk pool so that we're paying their premiums and they're completely insured, including their whole families, just dealing with risk factors. So we've been very aggressive in our state about making sure no surprise billing and no shifts, equal access to testing.
I don't want you to blow your source, but there are millions of Americans tonight who would love to have access to a test, free or not. How is it that New Mexico, and throw any modesty aside, is so well equipped to test its residents?
Well, one thing I want to say is that 2 million people really doing effective surveillance, recognizing now that we are struggling and grappling with individuals who are asymptomatic and really trying to get our hands around, right, the contact, making sure that we're doing everything we can to minimize community spread. We should be doing a lot more. The position that New Mexico's in that's a bit different is that we are a state that's got 2 of the 5 national laboratories. We have incredible research centers. And so we're equipped with the kind of instrumentation that allows us to do rapid testing and to do 500 to 1,000 tests per machine at a time. We're a state that could get to, in short order, 6,000 tests run per day. Here's the challenge. Getting the materials and getting the FDA approval fast enough on each of those instruments. They've made it incredibly complicated to access the swabbing at the front end and the reagents at the back end. It's all tied to which company makes which instrument. And frankly, it's become a full-time job working either around or directly through the federal government to make sure that that supply chain stays so that we can be more proactive so that we don't become an epicenter. The more states that are able not to become the epicenter, then the more likely you have a national response that saves many more lives than the current way we're doing it, which is chasing where the largest number of cases and spreads is by itself. We have to help those states, but you better slow the spread in the rest of the country or the whole country is going to look like that.
So here's what we've learned. In addition to being a staggeringly beautiful place to live in or visit, New Mexico seems to be about as well squared away for what's coming as any other state in our union. To the governor, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, thank you very much again, amid all you have to care about tonight, for spending a few minutes with us. Coming up for us, the new coronavirus guide.
I'd like to weigh in on New Mexico. whenever I was out there in 2013, after me going back to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and basically becoming entrapped by People's Church that asked me to participate in some of their activities. And then after they figured out who I was, I thought that I was going to wind up going to jail that day simply for trying to be a good Samaritan and helping out in the People's Church in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I left Collision Clinic not knowing what I was going to do with my life. I just knew that my life was basically over at that point in time. And I went to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I rented out a spot somewhere, I don't even know where it was, in between Santa Fe, New Mexico and Albuquerque, which is about an hour and a half drive apart, of leaving my trailer and my tools and all my records. And I went up into the mountains, and I spent about 2.5, 3 months up there adoring their views and looking at various things that I had never ever seen before, as far as different lighting, the big gorges up there of the Rio Grande, went all the way up into Eagle's Nest, called the Enchanting Circle, up where there was a lot of illegal activity that went on back during the Wild Wild West days. Doc Holliday and places like that that stayed in this hotel, including Jesse James. And stayed up there living on the land. And then I come back to Santa Fe, New Mexico, after spending some time in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where the big laboratory is, where the black hole, where I got acquainted with the individual that was against nuclear energy. Got acquainted with all of that, spent some time in Santa Fe, went into the Capitol, visited with them. Very, very enlightening people, very good people, and some of the best medical treatment centers in the world was up in that area. Matter of fact, though, they was the ones that scanned me and got me on a good bursitis arthritis medication, to the point that I could go on about my life in a halfway civilized way without being in a lot of pain. I stayed in a homeless shelter in Santa Fe, New Mexico, give or take, for about 40 days, right at 6 weeks. And I remember leaving from there, going back down south after getting my trailer, and going down into the Albuquerque area and spending 2 nights in a homeless shelter in downtown Albuquerque. I didn't realize that the problems in Albuquerque was as severe as what they was, pertaining to the drugs and pertaining to the gangs. You keep in mind, you got all those different Indian tribes that live out there. You got all the Mexicans coming up from Old Mexico into New Mexico. You got the gangs that live out in California. Then you got the gangs and the drugs that come out from Las Vegas and the Oklahoma area way. And Albuquerque, New Mexico is a very, very beautiful state, but they have some internal serious problems. And I basically stayed 2 nights in a homeless shelter that was basically just a death camp. I mean, you could literally feel the death of various people that was sick and couldn't breathe good and was throwing up and all the etc. in this homeless shelter, that it was ooky and gory, to say the least, before I went ahead and packed on up and left Albuquerque and went down south, got on Highway 10, and then headed back east, going towards Louisiana, going towards Texas, and then from Texas to Louisiana, from Louisiana through Mississippi and Alabama, and then back into Florida. But I will give New Mexico 2 thumbs up in regards to their social networking pertaining to their welfare system. That is the best in the country, the very best.
From the government.
On a random basis to
And maybe the reason why it's so good is because they do have to deal with so many different cultures and so many different people from so many different places that they're very diversified whenever it comes to their medical industry over there.
Floridians to lose their jobs. What we're going to do in the state of Florida, and I'll be issuing an executive order, is anybody traveling from those regions in New York or New Jersey to the state of Florida is going to have to do a mandatory 14-day self-isolation. That's the only way we can be sure that virus is not going to be reintroduced in the state of Florida and then spread.
So let's repeat for the record, tourism brings in billions of dollars every year in Florida. But right there, despite concern about crowded spring break beaches in his state, despite a huge population of seniors in Florida, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis today stopped short of ordering people to stay in their homes. Instead, as you heard him say, anyone flying into Florida from New York and New Jersey will now have to self-quarantine for 2 weeks. The order does not apply to anyone who chooses to, say, drive south on I-95 and enter Florida by car. Another break for us. Coming up, this might look to you like people crossing a London street. And it is, but wait till we play you the audio when we come back.
Believe in best friend, believe in growth, movement, and the awesome power of the get-together. We believe in beautifully designed homes with innovative floor plans and living exactly how you want to live, surrounded by people who make life better. Del Webb, we believe you'll like it here.
When things that previously have been done in the dark are forced into the light, that makes stuff happen. You start asking questions, stuff happens, right? There's something about the effect of sunlight.
Last thing before we go here tonight, ask Donald Trump about Bojo, Boris Johnson, and Trump will tell you that they call Bojo, Boris Johnson, the Trump of the UK. Indeed, and true to form, Bojo was way late in taking the coronavirus seriously and way late in calling for Brits to stay home, as in he just did it today. So our friends in England now must get used to the life that millions of us in this country have been leading for a few days. Like us, there's no sports on the telly, and like us, they have a slew of temporarily unemployed play-by-play broadcasters in the sports business. So the British rugby announcer Nick Heath has decided to do play-by-play on highlights from everyday life.
Crossroad dash, light turns to red. We wait for the beats. There they are now then. JD Sportsman, he's got a decent start. Leggings on the outside. Oh, JD Sportsman's been distracted over the shoulder, and Leggings is going to get there. Oh, she does it again. 3 titles in 3 days. Off past Vegas Gold for the lap of honor. Victorious. So this, the international 4x4 pushchair formation final. And, well, we've got the up front pair, of course, are Johansson and Eriksson from Sweden, and they're in with the Brits here in Smith and Black, and they're doing particularly well of staying quite close with them around this very delicate bend. Of course, they're pretty familiar with this course, and, well, that's what saw them become European champions just a few months ago. Great to see them back. Will you join us live here on
Sound of the business.
elsewhere. So they're moving fast, they say, on this. We're going to stay in the story for you again tomorrow night. Lou Dobbs, next on Fox Business. Have a good evening.
Welcome back to extended Fox News at Night coverage of the coronavirus crisis. I'm Shannon Breen. We are taking your questions to our top medical experts in just a minute. That's our plan every night as we do our special coverage past midnight Eastern. So you can always tweet us a question at Fox News Night. We'll try to get it in. The number of U.S. deaths stands at 545 tonight. Nearly 44,000 people officially diagnosed with COVID-19 across all 50 states. That number is increasing as testing becomes much more widely available, and estimates that 90% or more of those being tested are negative. President tonight says America will soon be back open for business as the nation grapples with competing data sets. One showing the economy heading for potential disaster amid a coronavirus shutdown. The other showing COVID-19 cases rising in hard-hit areas like New York and New Jersey, but not a spike in the heartland. We begin tonight with Kevin Cork on the stalled relief effort on Capitol Hill. As Kevin, folks around the country are asking what the heck is going on. Get it done.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, no matter where you stand on the political issues of the day, left, right, or in the middle, the fact is people need help, and they need Congress to step up and get the job done. Meanwhile, a 49-46 vote, Shannon, left the nearly $2 trillion measure once again short of the 60 votes needed to advance as the chamber once again remains deadlocked for a second day.
We were this close, and suddenly the Senate's serious bipartisan process turned into this left-wing episode of supermarket sweep.
Frustration on Capitol Hill as Senate Republicans watch their latest efforts to pass a $2 trillion bipartisan coronavirus stimulus package collapse under the weight of Democratic demands. Among them, expanded tax credits for wind and solar power, increased leverage for labor unions, an extra $500 billion for election-by-mail efforts, same-day voter registration, reduction in airline carbon emissions, and diversity requirements for companies receiving aid. Requests that have nothing to do with the virus and left Republicans fuming.
We're here trying to fight for the man and woman in the street in our hometowns, and yet they're fighting for the Green New Deal.
There's some good members of Congress. How did these morons make it through the birth canal? I mean, people are losing their jobs. Some of my colleagues, they're acting like a-holes.
The potential government bailout has even become the latest flashpoint in Delta Airlines' long-standing battle with labor organizers, trying to unionize the company's flight attendants. According to Delta, union leaders have called on Congress to exclude the airline from any potential federal aid if the airline tries to stop unionizing efforts. While Republicans normally hold a slim 53-47 majority in the chamber, negotiations have been made even tougher thanks to the absence of 3 quarantined Senate Republicans, Rand Paul, Mitt Romney, and Mike Lee. Still, Democrats remain optimistic that even as the clock continues to run out on millions of Americans' job prospects, common ground will eventually be forged. Said Illinois Senator Dick Durbin, "Take a deep breath. We're going to pass this bill." Well, sooner rather than later is certainly the call of action here in the nation's capital. As you mentioned, Shannon, more than 550 Americans have already died in this pandemic, and now there are state governors around the country that are calling for basically shutdown in their respective states. That's about a third of America's population. All this is happening as we continue to wait for lawmakers to figure out exactly what to put in this rescue bill with so many Americans in desperate need. Shannon?
We're watching as they continue around the clock. Kevin, thank you.
You bet.
All right, new video tonight from Italy where police in Rome are stopping all vehicles at roadblocks. Italians can only leave home for limited workplaces and situations of need like grocery shopping or doctor's visits. The people are required to carry documents certifying their reason for being out. Police are even making sure Italians stay at least 3 feet apart at the supermarkets, and they only let in a few customers at a time in each store. Rick Leventhal is tracking tonight the domestic crackdown on coronavirus violators. Rick?
Shannon. And that could be going on right here in the next few weeks if people does not cooperate the way that they need to.
Shannon, across the globe and here at home, authorities are getting increasingly aggravated and threatening harsher penalties against people who are flaunting the new rules regarding coronavirus and social distancing, with incidents in Australia, France, Germany, England, And here in the United States, down in Florida, they're closing beaches because of the spring break-like parties there. In Chicago, cops busted a house party with dozens of people over the weekend. And here in New York City, there are now designated patrols by the NYPD enforcing not just the takeout and delivery rules for bars and restaurants, also dispersing people if they're in groups on the street, in parks, or even in stores. 2 people were busted in Queens for running an illegal bottle club.
We're used to crowds, we're used to lines, we're used to being close together. Not anymore. We're not going to allow crowds to form. We're not going to allow lines where people are tightly packed next to each other. We're not going to allow any indoor space to get overcrowded. We're not going to allow outdoor spaces to get overcrowded. From this point on, everyone needs to understand social distancing, 6 feet apart.
The other big focus in New York is on adding hospital beds, with concern the healthcare system could be overloaded and break down. On Monday, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo toured the Javits Convention Center in New York City, where FEMA and the National Guard are both setting up separate temporary field hospitals, with several other hospitals being built across the state, trying to increase capacity by 50%.
We'll start erecting the equipment upstairs. Luckily, Javits has plenty of space. We're even expanding Javits. This was never an anticipated use, but you do what you have to do. That's the New York way.
More than 20,000 people in New York State have now tested positive for COVID-19, more than 12,000 in New York City, with about 1 person dying every hour. And the mayor saying things are not going to get better. They're going to keep getting worse, not just in March, but through April and possibly into May. Shannon?
All right, Rick Leventhal in New York. Thank you. Breaking news out of Washington State tonight. Boeing suspending operations come Wednesday, idling tens of thousands of workers. And Democratic Governor Jay Inslee issuing a 2-week shelter-in-place order after being criticized for not doing so as quickly as California, Illinois, and New York did. Jeff Paul's tracking it all, joins us live from our West Coast newsroom. Hey, Jeff.
Yeah, Shannon, Governor Jay Inslee issuing the stay-at-home order after hearing and seeing that not enough people were taking the warning serious enough. All this happening while Seattle's nurses are becoming desperate to find masks and face shields. The situation's so bad, one hospital is launching a 100 million mask challenge, asking locals to start pitching in and donating what supplies they might have at home for medical professionals. Now, under the order, residents should only be going outside to buy groceries, seeking medical attention, or if they work for an essential business. Folks can be outside, but they need to be 6 feet apart. The order also bans all gatherings of people for spiritual, social, or for recreational purposes, including weddings and funerals. Governor Inslee saying hitting it hard now is the fastest way to get back to normal.
These measures are more stringent, and our goal is the same: to reduce social interactions, physical interactions, where this highly contagious virus can spread. This weapon, distancing ourselves, is the only weapon against this virus.
In California, the U.S. naval ship Mercy left San Diego today where it headed to Los Angeles. It'll be in place to help serve as a referral hospital for non-coronavirus related patients to help free up hospitals to focus on the pandemic. Now, last week, Governor Newsom issued a stay-at-home order, but was unhappy to see so many people not social distancing this past weekend. Beaches up and down the coast were packed, hiking spots were full of people, and some state parks hardly had anywhere to park. As a result, the governor is now ordering those parking lots to be blocked off.
I don't want to close big, beautiful, open spaces. Not when we're encouraging people to go outside with intention and purpose. Not linger, but to deal with the health needs that we all have of being outdoors and taking a deep breath, practicing common sense and social distancing.
Now, anyone who goes against the stay-at-home order technically could face a misdemeanor in California. However, Governor Newsom does not want to get law enforcement involved just yet. He's hoping social pressure will be enough to keep folks at home. Shannon?
All right, Jeff Paul, thank you very much. So, Democratic Minority Leader Senator Chuck Schumer just told reporters the Senate could vote as soon as tomorrow on this stimulus deal. President Trump was optimistic today that the country would be back in business, but what do his medical experts have to say? Mark Meredith has more on the president's latest strategy and what's driving it. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Shannon. Life in America, as you know, has changed so much these last few weeks.
And the question that so many people are asking is if and when will things get back to normal? Today, President Trump said he thinks the economy at least could be back up and running sooner than some expect.
Our country wasn't built.
Starts raining.
This is still the relative quiet before the storm.
The governor has ordered every hospital in New York to increase bed capacity by 50%. New York State now home to around half the confirmed cases in this country, with more than 20,000. That's tripled in 3 days, and with more than 150 deaths.
If we don't get the ventilators in particular, we will actually start to lose lives who could have been saved.
The state says many cases are ages 18 to 49. Experts suggest vaping might be a factor.
You can get it. The numbers show you can get it if you're a young person.
The economy cratering. The restaurant food service industry alone estimates 7 million could lose their jobs. Restaurant manager Jay Boken already has.
People are not going to be able to support their families.
And stay-at-home orders still spreading. Ohio, Louisiana, Connecticut, Indiana, West Virginia, and Michigan among the recent additions. But not everyone is taking social distancing seriously enough.
We can't have the kind of social distancing that parts of Italy had, or we will turn into Italy with those case counts and those death rates.
More than 6,000 have now died in Italy, among them more than 20 doctors. Here, thousands of retired healthcare workers are now heeding the call to come back to work.
I feel I have a moral obligation to share my skills. We can't imagine what it's going to be like a week or two from now.
So many places now struggling for supplies.
We just received our allotment from the federal government's National Strategic Stockpile. The allotment of personal protection equipment for one of our hospitals, that allotment is barely enough to cover one shift at that hospital.
And Mercy, the Navy hospital ship with 800 personnel aboard, today set sail for Los Angeles.
Here in Los Angeles, they have made a deal with a South Korean company to buy coronavirus test kits direct from them. They say they hope to be carrying out 5,000 tests a day by the end of this week. And one councilman said that they just couldn't wait around for the federal government. Nick Watt, CNN, Los Angeles.
Good for you.
When it comes disease after his recovery, so he can be one of the superheroes who's going to help us on the other.
Underreported, especially in countries where widespread testing has been slow to roll out or delayed, like the US or Italy. The number of people infected with the virus could be 10 times that official number, which is why almost every healthcare professional is urging all of us to stay at home and avoid contact with others as much as possible. Dr. Emily Porter is an emergency room physician who ran the numbers using CDC data and came to the conclusion if nothing is done to slow this outbreak, no social distancing, no attempt to limit contact, no effort to slow transmission, more than 7 million Americans would die simply because of a lack of respirators.
Good God.
That means that 49 people out of 50 are going to die because we do not have the respirators and the ventilators to take care of them. That is scary. That should scare you. That scares me. That should scare everybody who can understand basic math, including my second grader, that 1 in 50 are bad odds. So what that also means is that the doctors have to choose who that 1 in 50 is. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if you had to say, oh, I'm sorry, you have had cancer before, so therefore you don't have a perfectly clean bill of health, so you're not worth saving. Can you imagine saying, oh, I'm sorry, you're 80, and I've got a 30-year-old that needs the ventilator?
And Dr. Porter joins us now from Austin, Texas. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Just start with the latest news that we've heard in the last couple of hours, that President Trump has been very clear he wants to see some kind of return to business as usual, or as close to usual, I guess, in a matter of weeks, not months. He's worried about the economy, even though it seems his health advisors are clearly not on board with this. This is what the president said earlier. Listen to this.
If it were up to the doctors, they may say, let's keep it shut down. Let's shut down the entire world.
Is it possible to fix the economy before you have this viral outbreak under control? You know, despite what the president says, can you do both at once?
I heard him say that actually live today, and he's not listening to the doctors. So I think the biggest problem is that we don't have a unified response. Our country is so spread out. and he's leaving it up to the governors, and then some of the even mayors and the more local government is choosing to be more cautious. So our governor has not shut down Texas, but he said yesterday, county by county. So Austin Travis County is going on lockdown tomorrow. So that helps Austin Travis County, but you can drive 2 miles and get to another county. So I feel like what doctors are saying is that it has to be unified across the board. If we just do it piecemeal, little by little, then things are going to keep spreading. The idea of flattening the curve is that you have everyone in a unified response at once. You can stop the infectivity that keeps happening and not go past your healthcare capacity, which is not just ventilators. My video is mostly about ventilators because that's the thing that's really scary, but also ICU beds, nurses, doctors, gloves, masks, everything. And that's going to increase.
And this idea of a uniformed approach, an all or nothing, we're all in it together kind of thing, you made this very clear in that YouTube clip that you posted, and here's part of it. Listen to this.
This is about everybody coming together for the common good, that we want a future for our children. And it's 2 weeks, man. It's like 2 to 4 weeks. And I hope that if you care about anybody other than yourself, including especially these 47 million Americans, that you will also do the same and just not complain about it and just do it, because it's what we got to do.
Yeah, it's what we've got to do, but it's not everyone's doing it. When does that 2-week period begin, or that 4-week period begin, and when does it end?
That's the problem. So the president announced something called this, 15 days, and this is in general saying 15 days to flatten the curve. The problem is that nobody's enforcing it. So I've been social distancing my children. I'm a mom of 4. My husband's on the front lines in the ER, and we're staying home. We're watching the fire burn at our house. We literally watched the fire burn the other night. But when I did go to grab a few groceries on Sunday, there were people in Walmart, like in the toy aisle. Buying garden shrubs, and it looked like. And so there's no uniform response. That 2 weeks, who knows? It hasn't started yet, in my opinion. In my house, it started. But in my county, it hasn't started. In my state, it hasn't started. And certainly across the country, it hasn't started. And, I just posted on my Twitter account, which is at Dr. Emily Porter, MD, a side-by-side of the graphs of Italy, the number of deaths per day, and the number of deaths per day in the U.S. And if you compare those side-by-side, we're trending worse than Italy right now. Theirs actually started going down the last couple days. The number of deaths per day from coronavirus in Italy has actually gone down the last 2 days. But that's because they had a lockdown. I mean, it was beautiful. I saw them singing and, to each other out their windows on their porches and things. It was beautiful. But they did that, and now we're seeing their cases trend down, their deaths trend down. Same thing with China. But we're still trending up. And we're like eight days into this, or this 50-day period. I don't think it's up yet.
Yeah, and this is the thing. Just explain this to me, though. The official numbers we're seeing in terms of cases and death toll, it's a snapshot of where we were, though, right? 15 days ago. Can you explain why that's the case and what it actually means?
Yeah, so I think we just started testing people. So I know my sister, Katie Porter, the rep from Southern California, about a week and a half ago, she was with her whiteboard, and she got the head of the CDC, Dr. Redfield, to agree that everyone in America could get tested without financial issues, right? So it's like $1,300 to get tested. The government's going to pay for it. The problem is, where are the tests? Where are the tests? So at our hospital, we're being told that at hospitals around here that only people who have these exposures can get tested. Well, nobody's been on a cruise in 2 weeks. So those questions, when you go in, I got an allergy shot a few days ago. They asked me if I'd been to China. They asked me if I'd been to Italy, but they didn't ask me if I'd been to the grocery store with everybody else, because now we have community spread. And so these numbers are I think that the number of patients are actually going to explode as we get more and more tests made available to us. But it's really the number of deaths. And to be honest with you, I know a lot of people who have needed testing. I won't name names, who can't get it because they're not meeting these criteria. The threshold for who requires a test also varies hospital to hospital, city to city, state to state. The CDC has their requirements, and then some hospitals have different requirements. So like the hospital near where I am, they were doing drive-through testing. Just anyone who wanted to get tested. They ran out of supplies in 2 days. 2 days, they ran out. So now they're saying, well, we're only testing people who are flu negative and who don't have influenza, because you can't possibly have both. You can actually, but they're saying if you're flu negative, then we'll test you. Well, guess what? The reagent that you need to test people for flu is the same as what you need to test for coronavirus. So they ran out of the reagent to test for coronavirus. They've got all the tests, but they can't run them because they've been testing all these people for flu. So it's just so chaotic. We need a unified leadership. Dr. Fauci's wonderful. He's trying to give us recommendation, but the question is, who's listening? And if they're listening, they're implementing it.
Yeah, we're out of time, Doctor, but we've needed some kind of direction and leadership for a while now, and it just sort of hasn't materialized. I guess we can hope that it will one day. Dr. Emily Porter, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
That'll be all. Good luck to all of us. Good luck to each and every one of us. Coming from 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. And shalom. Thank you.